Welcome to the Single Point, part of the Rouge Radio podcast, where we go one-on-one, or in this case, it's two-on-one with our guests. And as part of our 9 teams in 9 weeks, our first show is dedicated to the Toronto Argonauts. And for that, we bring on the voice of the Argos, Mr. Mike Hogan. Mike, thanks for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure, guys. Thanks for asking me.
All right, now let's rewind a little bit here because this is kind of like a long-winded question, but it kind of has to deal with the mindset of Argonaut fans because back in 2016, the Argos traded their first-round pick, an all-star DB, for a perennial backup quarterback in Drew Willie. Their 2017 offseason started off by not hiring a GM and coach until like March. They won a Grey Cup in that year. Last year it seemed disappointing just right from the start. What is the expectations for the Argos this year, at least from the fans' perspective?
I think it's wait and see. I think Argo fans just want to get the stench of 2018 behind them as quickly as possible. There were a lot of moves made in the offseason. I think the overwhelming majority of fans were happy to see Corey Chamberlain come back. I think the overwhelming majority of fans were giddy when Darrell Walker signed. And I think the overwhelming majority of fans were pretty happy with what the team did in free agency. So I guess everybody's just waiting to go. And, when you have a disappointing season like the Argos did a year ago, where the team really underachieved, I think, in everybody's minds. If you went back and looked at the preseason prognostications last year, I think everybody would have had Hamilton 1, Toronto 2, or Toronto 1, Hamilton 2. And, the Argos just really, when Ricky got hurt, really, that's not an excuse for the defense, but when Ricky got hurt, things just seemed to go south quickly, and it was just one of those years. So I think everybody's just anxious to get this training camp started and get the regular season underway.
It's Tony Allen here, so you can recognize the voice. I don't know if this is an elephant in the room for you or not, but obviously Toronto made huge waves by wanting to get in on the Bo Levi Mitchell sweepstakes for free agency. Was this ever something that was going to happen? Do you feel that Bo was just using the Argonauts as a negotiating tool, and were those numbers that the Argos were throwing around? I don't know if you have connections inside, but were those real numbers up in the 800,000s that they were going to offer him for him?
I will let you know that I was in the room. I was in the war room on free agent day. You can read the article on Argonauts.ca if you go back and take a look. I can confirm those numbers were legitimate. My jaw dropped when I heard the offer, and they upped it a little bit later on at 3 o'clock. They made the offer right at 12:02, which I thought was odd. I didn't ask why everybody waited a couple of extra minutes, but they did before they got on the phone. And then they made the phone call to Dan Bertlieb, Bo Levi Mitchell's agent, and Jim Popp spelled out the numbers, how much they were offering in terms of total contract, how much of that was signing bonus, how much of that was moving allowance. The way that a contract is broken down, and I'll try to do this as simply as possible just for math reasons. Let's say a contract of $100,000 is offered to a player. If you live outside, I think it's 80 kilometers of Toronto, in our case, wherever put your CFL market in this city, you get a certain amount of housing allowance tax-free. So if you're coming from the States, you can ask for up to whatever a legitimate number would be for living expenses. And then you get a signing bonus on top of that. So you could offer a player $4,000 a month in living expenses or housing expenses, and then you could offer him, $20,000 in bonus money, and then the other $75,000 or so would be regular contract. The bonus money is taxed at 15% roughly. The base of the contract is at 30% normal taxation. So by upping the bonus money, you can really give a player a big advantage in taxes. At 3 o'clock, they phoned back, Vertlieb, asked where Bo Levi was, and said, we're going to substantially up the signing bonus, which would have been a big savings to Bo Levi Mitchell in taxes. And they got a call about 10 minutes later saying that, no, we're not going to do it. They're going to stay in Calgary. So I think that for a long time, Bo Levi Mitchell was at least listening to the Argonauts. It was a legitimate offer. It was a serious offer. And if he was just playing the Argos to get an extra $100,000 or so per year out of Calgary, it worked like a charm. But I can tell you absolutely with 100% certainty that the Argos did offer Bo Levi Mitchell an astronomical amount of money to come to play for the Argos this year.
Oh, the power of free agency. Hey, Mike, let's talk about the Argos, their current quarterback position, because they have two on the roster that were relegated to backup last year. What are their expectations, specifically with James Franklin after his, I wouldn't call it a disastrous year, just maybe a unsatisfactory year compared to what his potential was?
Well, again, if we go back, to a year ago in the offseason, I think James Franklin was before the trade was made and before he signed with the Argos, he was the next guy, right? He was the next high-profile quarterback that potentially had star power, and the Argonauts made the deal without having a contract signed to pick him up from Edmonton, and then signed him. And I think everybody looked at that saying, "Wow, that's great." And there was a question when Mark Trestman held his preseason news conference. And the first question was, who's your starting quarterback? Is it Ricky Ray, coming off one of the best seasons of his career in a Grey Cup, or James Franklin? That's how highly people thought of James Franklin. He and the Mark Trestman system just did not mesh last year. Mark's very high percentage, very ball controlled. James Franklin is a guy who likes to get vertical often. So, right now, I think everybody's conceded that on the depth chart right now, James Franklin is QB1, and then it's McLeod Bethel-Thompson, it's Brandon Bridge, and then the other guys in camp are Dakota Prukop and Noah Picton. So I think everybody expects Franklin to be better than he was a year ago, and I think that he's just got a different mindset coming in because he and Mark, for whatever reason, and probably system more than anything else, just didn't hit it off from day one. So the expectations are high, and I think they should be.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the quarterbacks. Let's go to the further behind center, the running back position, because the Argonauts came out of free agency with a plethora of running backs, with a coordinator that doesn't like to run the ball a lot. Is that expected to change with Chapdelaine at the helm there?
I think that everybody, when Mark left, they needed an offensive coordinator, and they decided to go in a different direction than Tommy Condell. So they brought in a guy with CFL experience. I know that Coach Chamberlain did want the majority of the staff, and I think everybody but one has CFL experience. So he wanted a guy to come in and take over the reins. And whether you're running the ball or throwing the ball to the running back, I think that the running back has to be in the Canadian Football League a key position. Guys got to be able to catch. Guys got to be able to block too. James Wilder Jr. is the incumbent. He'll be the guy to beat. As you mentioned, they've got 7 guys now in camp. Terrell Sutton is a guy that I don't think the Argos really had on the radar, and he phoned them on free agency night to see if there was an availability, going back to his relationship with Jim Popp in Montreal. Mercer Timmis comes over from Hamilton. Dexter McCluster is still here. Brandon Burks is still here. They signed Kelvin Taylor from the NFL, who was a star at Florida. And then you've also got Chris Rainey as the X Factor, who can line up in the backfield, line up in the slot, line up as a wideout in different formations. And it's going to be interesting to see how Chapdelaine uses him. But, when you look at what they've done, they've got a lot of backs competing for not a lot of reps. So I'm very curious to see what happens there.
Well, we've got an Argos team that will definitely have its challenges with turnover, but as I was kind of putting my side of this show together, going through that Argonaut schedule, it is road home, road home, road home, road, and then you look at the end where you get some home games to kind of wrap it up. I don't know if you want, we'll ask you your overall record at the end, but when it comes down to the schedule, are the Argos going to lose this schedule or lose this season at the beginning, or do they have a chance to win it with their schedule at the end with, I believe it's 4 Eastern games to wrap it up?
Yeah, it's stay close during the hellish part, which at the beginning, you mentioned the road. It's all out west. So from what I understand, the team is going to stay out west for 2 weeks. It's a Friday night game, and then I believe 2 Thursday night games the next 2 weeks. So that's not going to be easy sledding at all. But the Argonauts, at that time of the year, maybe it's a little team bonding. They've got a weird schedule this year. Everybody's got to do it, I guess, once every 9 years, but the Argos have week 1 off. So maybe that's an opportunity to kind of refocus and get ready for that tough part of the schedule to start the season. And then, as you mentioned, you finish up strong against the East, where every game is a 4-point game. And, let's face it, on paper, the weaker teams are in the East. So if you've got an opportunity against, a depleted Ottawa team from a year ago and still some question marks in Montreal, if you can keep it close through the first half of the season and then make a run down the stretch, the Argos have as good a shot as anybody of competing for first, although I think everybody would assume that Hamilton would be the favorite in the East.
It's going back because you mentioned Corey Chamberlain, the new coach, coming back after a long sabbatical, I guess a week or a year sabbatical. I hate to be that guy to ask this question because the last time that we saw Corey Chamberlain as head coach and Jacques Chapelain as his offensive coordinator, they had a atrocious record in Saskatchewan. Is that kind of maybe peering in the back of other fans' minds? Maybe certain of the players who have been in the CFL for a few years.
I can tell you right from the get-go that when Chamberlain was announced, the players to a man and specifically on defense were thrilled. But between the time that the end happened in Saskatchewan, and don't forget he won a Grey Cup as head coach as well. But he also won a Grey Cup here in Toronto 2 years ago as a defensive coordinator, and the players loved playing for him. He plays a style that players love. It's high pressure, it's high risk, high reward. And, you ask any DB or defensive lineman or even linebackers, are you happy in that system? And I think to a man they'd say, yeah, let's go get them. So I know that side of the football is excited. Offensively, we'll see. I think that James Franklin will benefit from playing in a different system that might be a little more eager to throw the ball deep. Mark Trestman won a lot with his system, and far be it from me to criticize what he did. He won a Grey Cup in 17, but with James Franklin as a quarterback, it wasn't a good mix. It was not playing to the strength of the quarterback, and maybe Mark would have changed his ways if he was back for another full season with James as QB1, but he's not, so we won't know. I do know that Franklin is really looking forward to coming in this year. He's got, he's been reunited with one of his better friends with the Eskimos and Darrell Walker. That brings a new element of the team. It means S.J. Green's not going to see as many double teams, certainly, as he did in the past. So there's some opportunity for the Argonauts to score a lot more points than maybe people are going to anticipate going into the year.
Yeah, I think you just touched on that because I was just about to ask you. They went out and got the biggest free agent receiver in Darrell Walker. Definitely S.J. Green's not going to get the double team. He's not going to get that isolation for two defensive backs. So do you imagine that maybe his production is going to increase, or maybe is this going to stay around? Because the dude coming off that freakish injury a couple of years ago, he's still got some motor running, and he could still produce at a high level.
There's no question about that. We all know what kind of hands he has. And it was a struggle last year. It was difficult. He had two new quarterbacks essentially to work with. He was used to Ricky Ray, who just throws little soft pillows in there all day, and he had to adjust to those new quarterbacks. Darrell Walker is going to get a lot of double teams, and deservedly so. He's one of the better deep threats in the league. That's going to open up a lot for SJ underneath, and then you've got Armani Edwards. You've got Anthony Coombs coming back off injury. You've got Levi Noel kicking around out there. You've got, Chris Rainey as an X factor. You've got Wilder or whomever, lines up at running back. You've got another offensive lineman coming in Randy Richards, who started the last 2 years at tackle, one left, one right in the Grey Cup games for Calgary. So it's an interesting offense. I'm really curious to see how it meshes. But on paper, this team could score a lot of points, which I think would catch a lot of people off guard.
Part of our 9 teams in 9 weeks, when we go through the preview, we go through obviously key deletions and key additions, and going through the free agent tracker. In doing this, I noticed that Marcus Ball is still a free agent. I was wondering if, you've dealt with him last year. Is there, I think there was an article through CFL.ca that indicated that he's not done with football. Is there a potential that maybe Marcus Ball would come back to the Double Blue?
I think, as Jim Popp said at a town hall meeting last month now, to the fans, he was asked about Marcus Ball because everybody loves Marcus Ball, whether you're a player, whether you're a fan, whether you're a member of the media. He's just a really affable guy to be around and a solid team leader. This guy just oozes leadership. But if he comes back now, it's going to be in a backup role. And, Micah Alway was acquired for a reason. It was one of the guys that they had circled. In fact, when 1202 came around on free agency day, they made 2 offers. They made one to Bo Levi Mitchell, and they made one to Micah Alway. So even if they signed Mitchell, they were going to, get Micah Alway in as well if they could. They had to wait on everybody else until Mitchell told them no. So they really had targeted him to go and play that will spot. So for Marcus to come back, it would have to be in a different role, which is too bad because I think everybody wants to see, every popular player go out at the top of their game and, walking off with a championship. And that's not going to happen for Marcus as a starter, certainly. But, if they could fit him back in here and Marcus were to agree to the terms, and obviously it'd be a lot less money in his back pocket in Toronto. I think he's got some game left. It's just trying to find the right fit for him because I still, as I mentioned, I think he can still play.
All right, my final question is kind of off topic for the Argos, but I think because you likely have the experience to answer this question, there was a lot of buzz about NFL preseason games coming to Western Canada, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg was thrown around. Now, you would have lived through the Buffalo series in Toronto, so I don't know if I'm comparing apples and oranges here because we're talking preseason to regular season, but did these teams miss an opportunity? Did they dodge a bullet? Having experienced NFL crossover in your city, what was your opinion on all of that?
There is nothing, and I mean nothing, more boring than preseason football. If you have a vested interest in the team, it's one thing. Like if you're a Bomber fan, right? And the Bombers are playing in preseason and there's a positional battle, you're going to be interested in watching that. And then, when the Bombers are home, the visiting team's just going to throw up backups, right? That's just the way exhibition games work. When the exhibition games were held here in Toronto with the Bills, and even before that, they had Green Bay play Dallas here one year, and, it was backups after the first series, and I think everybody paid a pretty significant dollar to go and watch 2, good franchises play, were really disappointed. So you could look at it and say, Saskatchewan may have missed the boat because they could have shown how exciting CFL football is compared to watching the NFL live. I love both leagues, don't get me wrong. You go to an NFL game, there are a lot of breaks because of all the commercials. It can be a drag to go to a game live in the NFL. It's a perfect format for television. It's a great television sport. I think going to Canadian football is much more entertaining live than NFL football. And I love the NFL, don't get me wrong. And when you see a CFL game with a big crowd in a full stadium, you can't beat it, right? They may have missed the boat because I think it would have shown people in Regina or Winnipeg or whoever was eager to get that game at any point. They may have missed the boat because it could have shown how good the Canadian Football League product is in comparison.
All right. Mike, as isn't the case with all our guests, before we let you go, because we definitely appreciate you staying up late with us, can you give us a prediction on how you think the Argonauts will finish, and bonus points if you can predict the exact record?
18-0. How's that?
Oh, God.
I don't know. If they can get out of the gate decently, because as you guys mentioned off the top, it's a tough schedule with a new coach, new head coach, new offensive coordinator, a lot of new players as well. I mean, defensively, you could have Poop Johnson and Lemon and Antigua and Alway and Fogg all as new starters, right? And even if somebody else comes up from the States and impresses. So it might take a little time for this unit to gel. So if they can be 500 by Labor Day or even a game or two under 500, I think they're in a good spot to make a run down the stretch. Because of what's happening in Ottawa and Montreal right now, I'd be surprised if it's not a 500 team.
Yeah, definitely. At first I thought maybe you would have been a fan of the CFL Horseman podcast. One of their hosts always predicts the Stampeders going 18-0. A little long-running joke. Mike, thanks for coming on, and definitely we appreciate you, and hopefully we'll have you back throughout the regular season.
You have the number, guys. I love doing this, and anytime you need me, just ask.